The moon was full and heavy the night they tried to bury Rosie Brown. It hung over the stone courtyard like a lantern left burning too long, white, swollen, throwing silver light across every face in the crowd. Torches burned in iron brackets along the old pack walls. Sparks floated upward and vanished. The air smelled like wood smoke and damp earth, and something older. Something that lived inside ceremonies like this one. The whole pack had come. That was the first cruelty. Nobody stayed home. Nobody decided it was not their business. They had dressed in their good clothes and walked through the gate and taken their places along the courtyard edges, shoulder to shoulder. Silent in the way crowds go silent when they are watching something. They know they should stop, but won't. Rosie stood at the center of it. She wore a white satin dress, and sleeveless and simple, the kind of dress a young woman should feel beautiful in. Her blonde hair was pinned back with small floral clasps, soft and careful, the way her mother used to do it when Rosie was a child. She held a bouquet of pale flowers in both hands, white and cream, delicate things, and she was gripping them so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. If you looked closely, you could see the slight tremor in her arms, not from cold. The night was warm, from the effort of holding herself together in front of people who had come to watch her fall. Her eyes were down, not because she was ashamed, because she refused to give the crowd what they wanted. Beside her, in a worn iron wheelchair, was the man she was about to be bound to. His name, they said, was Dixon, the pack's crippled Omega. He wore rough, dark clothing, heavy fabric stitched and restitched like a man who mended his own things and did not ask for help. His left knee was wrapped in bandaging, visible below the cut of his trousers. His boots were old. His long, dark hair fell loose around his face, unwashed, tangled at the ends. He looked like a man the world had used up and set aside. And yet, he was not looking down. He was not crumpling under the public stare. He was sitting perfectly still, shoulders back, with his large hands resting quiet on his knees. And his eyes, dark and steady and impossible to read, were moving slowly across the courtyard like a man counting exits in a room he already understood. That calm did not fit the story everyone else was telling about him. Behind the two of them, to the right, stood Marie Brown. Rosie's stepmother wore black from collar to hem, a long gown, a draped cape, a wide-brimmed hat that tilted slightly over her dark hair. Her nails were long and painted the color of dried blood. She was smiling with her whole face, the kind of smile you wear when you believe, truly believe, that you have won something permanent. In her right hand, she held a rolled scroll, sealed with dark wax and the pressed crest of the Brown pack. The mating decree. Official. Witnessed. Binding. She raised one finger and pointed at Rosie. A slow, theatrical gesture, as if presenting a prize she had donated. The crowd did not cheer. They watched. And in that watching was everything. Curiosity and pity and guilt and relief that it was not them standing there. A few faces showed something close to sorrow. Most showed nothing at all. Rowan Brown, Rosie's father, stood at the far left edge of the gathering, not at the front, not beside his daughter, at the edge, half turned, like a man already beginning to leave before anything had ended. The elder's voice rose over the courtyard. The binding words had begun. Rosie tightened her grip on the flowers and did not break. But Dixon, the man in the wheelchair, the Omega the pack barely bothered to know, turned his head slowly. And for just a moment, he looked directly at her, not with pity, not with desperation, with something that felt strangely and completely like recognition. as if he had been waiting for her specifically, as if none of this was happening the way anyone in that courtyard believed it was. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. It is essential that we get your support through subscriptions, likes, and comments. So if this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button for us, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. All right, thank you. Now let's get back to the story. Let's go back, because nothing that happened in that courtyard appeared out of nowhere. It had been built, piece by piece, over 2 years of quiet damage. Rosie's mother, Clara Brown, died in late winter. She went quickly, an infection that turned serious before anyone thought to be afraid. She was 41 years old. She had warm hands and a steady voice, and she knew every plant in the woods around their property by name. She had taught Rosie all of them. When Clara died, the house did not collapse all at once. It just became quieter, emptier, like a room where someone has removed the furniture without saying anything. And you keep walking in expecting to sit down and finding nothing to hold you. Rowan Brown grieved the way some men grieve, sideways. He did not cry publicly. He worked too much. He came home late. He sat at the kitchen table with tea he did not drink and stared out the window at a yard he stopped maintaining. He was present in the way a photograph is present. There, but not available. Rosie managed. She was 19. She cooked. She kept the house clean. She showed up to pack functions and smiled and answered questions about her father's health, and then came home and sat in her mother's old chair and held herself together alone. She was good at managing. She had learned it young. Slime Marie arrived 8 months after Clara's death. She was introduced initially as a family friend, a woman Rowan had known years ago. She began visiting on weekends. She brought food. She complimented the house. She told Rowan he was brave, and she said it at exactly the right frequency. Not so often it sounded hollow, just often enough that it landed. Rosie watched. She noticed everything, the way quiet people notice things when they cannot change them yet. She noticed that Marie always sat between Rowan and Rosie at dinner. She noticed that when Rosie spoke, Marie's attention drifted and then snapped back, only when Rowan was about to respond, redirecting the conversation to something else. She noticed the way Marie touched Rowan's forearm when he seemed about to say something firm. It was a small motion. 2 fingers, a press. Just enough to adjust him. And Rowan adjusted. Every time. By the time Marie moved in formally, 6 months later, with a small ceremony and a press document, and Rowan's relieved, grateful smile, Rosie understood the architecture of what was happening. Marie was not loud. She did not shout or demand. She restructured the environment the same way water restructures stone, slowly, through consistent pressure, until the original shape was gone. Within 3 months of moving in, Marie had quietly rerouted Rosie's access to pack functions. Rosie's name was removed from the young women's training circles. A scheduling conflict, Marie said, apologetically. Her invitation to the elder council meetings, something Clara had arranged years ago as part of Rosie's pack education, stopped coming. Also a scheduling matter, apparently. 2 of Rosie's closest friends, Leah Taylor and Carolyn, stopped coming around. Not dramatically. The invitations just began to feel difficult. Leah mentioned once, quietly, that Marie had told several people Rosie was going through a private family matter and needed space. It was considerate, Marie had said. Protective. She's isolating you, Leah said at their last real meeting, voice low, glancing at the door. I know, Rosie said. What are you going to do? Rosie looked at her tea. She thought about her father's face, that soft, unreachable expression he wore now, that haze of gratitude that sat between him and every hard thing. I'm going to wait until I have enough to fight back with. She began keeping a journal, not a diary, not feelings and longing, a record, dates, incidents, exact words. She documented what was removed and when and what reason was offered. She noted whose names came up repeatedly in Marie's conversations and whether those people's behavior toward Rosie changed afterward. She wrote in small handwriting in a brown notebook she kept inside the lining of her winter coat. Rosie Brown was not passive. She was strategic. And she was building a case before she knew what she was building it for. The news came on a Tuesday morning. Rosie was in the kitchen making bread, real bread, kneaded by hand, one of the things Clara had taught her, when Marie walked in with the scroll already unrolled. No preamble, no sitting down, just the scroll on the kitchen counter, placed flat, and Marie's hands smoothing the edges in that particular way she had, the way that said, "This is already decided." "The moon binding ceremony is in 3 weeks," Marie said. She was dressed already, earrings in, nails fresh. She was the kind of woman who was always prepared before anyone else in the room. "Your name has been put forward." Rosie looked at the scroll without touching it. The pack seal was at the bottom. Dark red wax, the crest pressed into it. Brown family name, Rosie's full name, and beside hers, another. Dixon, no surname listed. "Dixon is an Omega," Rosie said. "He is a pack member," Marie replied, as though this answered everything. Rosie looked up. Marie was watching her with that smooth, pleasant expression she used when she knew she had all the leverage and wanted Rosie to feel it slowly. "Where is my father?" "He knows," Marie said. "He signed the co-authorization this morning." She tapped the bottom of the scroll. There was Rowan's signature, neat and careful, like a man trying to look confident about something he had already stopped believing in. "He agrees. This is the right arrangement for the family at this time." Rosie did not respond. She turned back to her bread, pressed her palms into the dough, and breathed. Marie waited a moment. When no argument came, she picked up the scroll, rolled it, and left the room. Rosie kneaded the bread until her arms ached. That afternoon, she went to find Evelyn Rourke. Evelyn was the pack's keeper of ceremonial law, a woman in her late 60s with iron gray hair and the kind of eyes that had seen too many things to pretend surprise at any of them. She lived on the east edge of the pack property in a stone house surrounded by documented scrolls and boxes of old law letters and shelves of dried herbs she claimed were purely ornamental, but everyone knew were not. Rosie sat across from her at the narrow table and placed a copy of the decree between them. "Can it be contested?" Rosie asked. Evelyn read the scroll slowly, twice. Her expression did not change. When she set it down, she folded her hands. "Once the mating decree is co-authorized and sealed with both a pack elder witness and the family patriarch, it is binding under traditional law unless the target party can demonstrate active coercion, fraudulent information, or documented mental incapacity at the time of signing. My father is not mentally incapacitated. He is emotionally managed by a woman who has spent 14 months arranging exactly this outcome. That is a distinction that requires evidence, not words." Evelyn's voice was quiet. "Rosie, do you have evidence?" Rosie thought of her notebook, the dates, the incidents, the names. "Not enough. Not yet." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then, almost to herself, "A decree sealed in error still binds until the error is proven, but a union completed under false conditions can be unwound. The binding is not the ending." Rosie looked at her steadily. So you're telling me to let it happen? I'm telling you, Evelyn said carefully, that there are multiple doors in a locked room, and that the person who knows which one opens is the one who watches the walls instead of the lock. Rosie went home. She did not cry. She opened her notebook and wrote the date and Evelyn's exact words and underlined the last sentence twice. Then she went to find her father. Rowan was in the back garden, the one he'd stopped maintaining. He was sitting on the old wooden bench her mother had loved, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. He looked up when Rosie approached, and his face did the thing it always did now. Opened briefly with relief, then closed again with something that was not quite guilt, but lived beside it. "Dad?" Rosie said. She sat beside him. She kept her voice even. "You signed the decree?" He looked into his cup. Marie explained the whole situation. She said it would... Stop. Rosie's voice was not loud, but it was very clear. "I need you to hear me without explaining what Marie said. Can you do that?" A long pause. Then, "Yes." "You are signing away my future, my rank, my choice. You are doing it because someone has made it easy for you to avoid looking at what that costs me. And I need you to know that I see what's happening. And I need you to know that silence is not the same as peace. It is just damage that hasn't finished arriving yet." Rowan Brown looked at his daughter. His eyes were wet at the edges. He did not stop the decree. But he did not sleep well for the 3 weeks that followed. Rosie noted that too. She saw him for the first time 4 days before the ceremony. It was not arranged. Rosie had gone to the market square in the Lower Pack district, the part of the territory where the older building sat, where the road was still cobblestone and the vendors kept their stalls close together for warmth. She was there for flour and herbs, ordinary things, the kind of errand that keeps your hands busy while your mind refuses to settle. She rounded the corner between the grain stall and the spice cellar and nearly walked directly into the wheel of his chair. She stepped back. He looked up. Dixon, the crippled Omega. He was younger than she had expected from the stories. Late 20s, maybe. Long dark hair pulled back loosely, some of it falling forward over his face. The bandaging was visible around his left knee, and the wheelchair itself was iron-framed and worn. Not a formal conveyance, but a working one, scraped and dented in ways that spoke of regular use over real terrain. His clothing was rough, dark linen, layered against the morning cold. Nothing expensive, nothing that announced rank or status or anything at all, really, except a man who had learned to be invisible. He was reading a folded letter. Or he had been. He had stopped when she appeared. Rosie waited for the usual Omega response to an unexpected encounter. The quick, downward glance, the slight folding inward, the careful non-presence that low-rank wolves learned early. It did not come. Dixon looked at her directly, not aggressively, not with challenge. Just with that same steady patience she had seen in his eyes, in her imagination, since the decree was placed on the counter, like someone who had already decided not to waste energy on performances. "Rosie Brown," he said. Not a question. She blinked. "You know who I am." Hard not to. "Your stepmother has been managing the announcement with a great deal of enthusiasm." Rosie stared at him. There was something in that sentence. The word managing, used precisely, as if he had spent time thinking about her stepmother's particular method of operating. "Do you have a problem with this arrangement?" she asked. Bluntly. A pause. He folded the letter carefully and set it in the side pocket of the chair. "Does it matter if I do?" "It might," she said, "if you wanted to contest it." He looked at her steadily. Something shifted very slightly at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like a man who finds something interesting where he expected to find nothing. "I don't want to contest it," he said. And before Rosie could process that, a heavyset man appeared from the next alley, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, dressed plainly, but moving with the particular alertness of someone who was there to escort rather than shop. Dixon glanced at him briefly. The man stopped, read the glance, and took a measured step back without being told. Rosie had seen pack guards do that. She had seen trained soldiers do that. She had never in her life seen an Omega receive that response from anyone. Dixon looked back at her. "I'll see you at the ceremony, Rosie Brown." He wheeled forward. The heavy-set man fell into step behind him, at a respectful distance, saying nothing. Rosie stood in the middle of the market square for a full minute after they had gone, holding her empty basket, turning over what had just happened, with the part of her mind that kept records. That man had not moved for Dixon the way you move for someone you pity. He had moved the way you move for someone you serve. The night of the ceremony arrived. The pack gathered under the full moon as it always had for binding rites, in the old stone courtyard, the one that had been used for generations of pack ceremonies, where the walls held the faint marks of old fire and the flagstones were worn smooth from decades of feet. Torches blazed in brackets. The elders' platform stood at the north end, a raised stone dais carved with the old wolf crest. Rosie had dressed alone. Marie had offered to help. Rosie had said, very quietly, that she preferred privacy, and something in the way she said it had made Marie leave the room without pushing. It was one of the first times Rosie had successfully held a boundary in that house. She noted it in the notebook before she put the coat on over her dress. She stood at the entrance to the courtyard and felt the weight of every eye in the crowd finding her at once. She knew what they were seeing. A young woman in white, dressed for a union that should have meant something beautiful, walking toward a man in a broken-down wheelchair. The optics were designed. Marie had designed them. The gap between what this should have been and what it was. That gap was the punishment. Rosie lifted her chin and walked. She was not going to give the crowd the performance Marie had written for her. Dixon was already at the center of the courtyard. He sat very still in the iron wheelchair, his knee bandaged, his boots worn and scuffed. His dark hair was loose tonight, falling around his face in a way that might have looked disheveled on another man, but on him looked deliberate. He was wearing the same rough, dark clothing. He had not dressed up. There was something quietly defiant about that. As Rosie took her place beside him, she glanced at his hands. They were resting on his knees, relaxed, no tension in the knuckles. Around them, a crowd of 30 or 40 pack members stood in varying states of interest and unease. She spotted Leah Taylor near the back, standing slightly apart from the others. Leah's face was tight, unhappy, doing the work of not crying in public. Beside her was Carolyn, who had one arm wrapped around her own waist and was staring at the ground. Marie stood to the right of the platform, dressed in her black. The decree scroll held openly in both hands for the crowd to see. Triumphant, patient, waiting for the scene to be completed. Rowan stood at the far edge of the crowd. His eyes found Rosie for just a moment. He looked away first. The elder, an old man named Carver, climbed the stone platform and began the words. Rosie listened to the ceremony language wash over her. Binding of blood and territory, witness of the moon, declaration before the pack. She felt Dixon shift slightly beside her, not away, closer. Just enough that the warmth of him was present through the cold air. She did not know why, but it helped. When the moment came for both parties to confirm the bond, Dixon spoke his name clearly and without hesitation. Rosie spoke hers. Her voice did not shake. The elder's staff struck the stone 3 times. The crowd was silent. Somewhere behind her, Marie made a soft sound that was almost, but not quite, a laugh. And then Dixon turned his head toward Rosie. Only toward her, not the crowd, not the elder, not the woman in black with the scroll. And he said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "You are braver than anyone in this courtyard. I want you to know, I have seen that." Rosie did not know what to do with that, so she held her flowers tighter and nodded once and kept her eyes forward. She would think about those words for a long time afterward. She had expected a modest escort, a packmate's vehicle, maybe, or a wagon if tradition was being honored. She had imagined something appropriate to an Omega household. Functional, unremarkable, in keeping with the story everyone had been told. The vehicle waiting outside the courtyard gates was none of those things. It was a dark enclosed carriage, heavy built, with 2 matched horses and a driver who sat up front with the practiced stillness of someone trained to be unseen rather than merely unnoticed. The carriage door bore no pack crest, but the wood was quality, oiled and maintained, with brass fittings that caught the torchlight. Rosie stopped walking. The broad-shouldered man from the market square, the one who had taken that single step back when Dixon looked at him, was holding the carriage door open. He met Rosie's eyes briefly, then dropped his gaze in a way that was respectful, not dismissive. Rosie looked at Dixon. He was watching her read the situation. Not rushing her, not explaining. Just waiting to see what she would do with the information her eyes were collecting. She got in. She had no better option yet. But she sat with her back straight and her hands folded and her mind wide open. The man who held the door, she learned later, his name was Joaquin Smith, had a particular quality about him, not coldness, more like compression. A person who took up less visible space than the amount of attention he paid to everything around him. He looked at the road, at the trees, at the gate they passed through as they left pack territory. And he looked at each thing the way you look at it when you have been trained to notice what has changed since the last time you checked. He was not a household attendant. He was a security man. Rosie filed that, added it to the growing stack of things that did not fit an Omega's life. The property they arrived at was not what she had been led to imagine. It was a compound, a proper one, walled, with outbuildings that suggested staff rather than family. The main house was large in the way of old money, not showy, but built to last, with thick stone walls and high windows and a front entrance that looked like it had been designed to receive important people and not embarrass anyone. Inside, the floors were clean. The fire was already lit in the main room. The 2 staff members moved through the corridor with the quiet efficiency of people who had been here a while and knew their jobs. They nodded to Dixon as he was brought through. One of them, a lean young man with careful eyes, said very quietly, under his breath, "Sir?" It was barely audible, but Rosie was standing close enough. She held that word in the front of her mind the way you hold a key before you find the lock. Sir, not Mr. Dixon, not Omega, not anything an Omega would be called by anyone. Sir. Rosie was shown to a room that was more than comfortable, more than any new mate of a low-rank wolf should have expected. A fire, proper furnishings, a window overlooking a back courtyard where she could see, even in the dark, the outlines of what looked very much like a training yard. She did not sleep for a long time. She lay on top of the covers with her coat still on and her notebook open on her knee, and she began to write. She met Lynn Carter the following morning. Rosie had been up before dawn. She had dressed quietly and walked through the compound's main corridor with the specific kind of attention that moves slowly and touches nothing. The way you learn a place without disturbing it. She counted doors. She noted which ones had locks and which ones stood slightly open. She observed which staff members moved with urgency and which moved with the unhurried confidence of people who had never been asked to rush. She was in the East Room, a long space that functioned as a library of some kind, with shelves of documents and rolled maps, when she heard the footsteps, not Dixon's. These were steady, heel to toe, on the footsteps of someone who had been walking purposefully their entire life. Lynn Carter was tall, not extraordinary, but tall in the way that people who have always expected to be heard are tall, upright, certain, taking the space they intended to take. She had dark hair, shot through with silver, cut cleanly at the jaw. Her clothing was simple and expensive in the way that requires no explanation. Her eyes were a dark gray-brown and they moved across Rosie, with the quality of an assessment that had already begun before entering the room. She was Dixon's mother. That was what Rosie had been told, but the compound did not move for Dixon the way it moved for her. When Lynn Carter crossed a room, things adjusted. Staff who had been efficient became quiet. The energy of the entire building pulled slightly inward, the way a crowd does when someone walks through it, who everyone recognizes, but no one acknowledges aloud. Lynn looked at Rosie for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "You've been awake since 5. You've already walked the East Corridor twice and looked at every door between here and the main entrance. You found the staff records in that cabinet, didn't you? You didn't open them, but you checked whether the lock was standard or keyed." Rosie said nothing. A small, controlled smile crossed Lynn's face. Not warm exactly, but not cold either. The smile of a woman who respects what she is seeing. "Your stepmother," Lynn said, "expected to send a broken girl." Rosie kept her voice level. "I'm aware of what she expected." "I know." Lynn moved to the window. "I want you to understand something, Rosie. This house is not what your stepmother believes it to be. And the man she selected for your humiliation is not who she believes he is." She paused. "But the details of that are not mine to give you. They belong to my son. What I will tell you is this. You are not in danger here. And you are not going to be managed here the way you were managed in your father's house. If you have questions, ask them directly. We do not do subtle manipulation in this compound. We have no patience for it." Rosie studied her. "Why are you telling me this?" Lynn turned from the window. "Because you're going to figure it all out anyway. I'd rather you figure it out with us than against us. It saves time, and time is currently a resource we cannot waste." She walked toward the door, then paused. "My son is in the training yard at 6:30. He usually works for 40 minutes and then has breakfast alone. If you wanted to observe something useful, I'm simply noting the schedule." She left. Rosie looked at the clock on the library wall. 6:22. She closed her notebook, tucked it under her arm, and went to find the training yard. What she saw in the training yard at 6:30 in the morning was not a crippled Omega sitting in a wheelchair. Dixon was standing. Not fully, not with the ease of a man who had never been injured. His left side was compensating, his right leg bearing more weight, the old injury still directing his body's balance. But he was upright. He was moving through a set of precise forms, not the broad, aggressive movements of pack fighting, but the contained interior movements of someone who had been trained in something formal and old. The kind of discipline that begins before you are 10 years old. and never fully leaves your muscle memory. He was not frail. He was controlled. Rosie stayed at the edge of the yard, half behind the corner of the outbuilding, and watched for the full 40 minutes. She did not take notes. She was too busy watching. She watched how Joaquin Smith appeared at the 30-minute mark, said nothing, and handed Dixon a sealed communication without being asked. She watched how Dixon read it while still moving through his forms. One hand working, one hand receiving the paper. The way a man reads documents while doing other things, because he does it constantly. She watched how Adam Cropper, the lean young man who had said, "Sir," the night before, arrived to collect the communication after Dixon had folded it, and moved away quickly in the direction of the east corridor, the one that led to what Rosie had noticed was a secure room. The pattern was clear. This was a working morning routine, a leader receiving communications, staff executing instructions. The wheelchair was parked at the edge of the yard like a tool someone had set down temporarily. Rosie went back inside and began building her list. She spent the next 6 days watching everything. She counted the guard rotation. 4 positions, 3-hour shifts, changed at unpredictable intervals rather than on a fixed schedule. A fixed schedule was for household security. Unpredictable intervals were for protection against people who study fixed schedules. She traced the supply deliveries. The food and household goods arrived from 3 different suppliers. Never the same one twice in a row. Delivered to different entry points. That was counter-surveillance protocol. She found, in the east wing near the document room, a carved sigil above the lintel. A wolf head encircled by 2 interlocking rings. She had seen that sigil once before, as a child, on a piece of official correspondence her mother had shown her. Her mother had told her, "That is the mark of the Alpha King's household. Don't touch anything with that mark unless someone who serves him asks you to." She stood in front of that sigil for a long time. Then she went looking for Dennis Howell. Dennis Howell was the oldest guard on the compound. In his 50s, solid, with gray at his temples and a scar across his chin from something that had happened a long time ago. He was practical in the way that older security men are practical, efficient without being performative. The kind of person who respects a direct question because they have spent too many years surrounded by indirect ones. Rosie found him, checking the bolt on the east gate at mid-morning. She walked up to him without preamble. "The sigil above the document room door," she said. "That's an Alpha King's household mark." Dennis Howell checked the bolt, checked it again, did not look at her. "Ask carefully," he said, his voice low and even. "Walls, listen in this house." He walked away. Rosie stood at the east gate and felt the shape of the truth getting very close. She chose the evening of the 7th day, not because she was certain, because she had collected enough that uncertainty felt like a choice rather than a limitation, and she had run out of patience for choices that cost her time. Dixon was in the east room after dinner, the library space where she had met Lynn Carter that first morning. He was working, as he often worked in the evenings, reading through documents that Joaquin brought and Adam collected. The wheelchair was beside the chair he was using. He had transferred himself to the reading chair, and the way he sat in it, weight balanced, spine straight, the controlled posture of a man managing pain without advertising it, told her the injury was real but managed. She knocked once and walked in. He looked up. "Rosie." No surprise in his voice, as if he had been expecting this particular conversation to arrive and had simply been waiting for her to choose the moment. She closed the door behind her. She did not sit. She stood in the center of the room, hands at her sides, and she looked at him the way she had trained herself to look at things. Straight, without flinching. taking in what was actually there instead of what was comfortable to see. I have been watching this compound for 7 days, she said. I have noted the guard rotation, the supply protocol, the communication chain, the staff hierarchy, and the sigil above the document room door. I have watched you receive and respond to communications that are not personal correspondence. I have watched your guard, not an attendant, a trained security officer, defer to you in ways that have nothing to do with family feeling. And I have stood in front of a mark that my mother told me as a child belongs only to the household of the Alpha King. Dixon was very still. My stepmother believed she was destroying me, Rosie continued. She selected the lowest-ranked, most marginalized mate she could find. She thought she was placing me beside nothing. But the wheelchair, the rough clothes, the Omega label, those are a costume. And I want to know who you actually are. A long silence. Then she said the words she had been carrying for 2 days, turning them over in her mind, checking them from every angle before she spoke them aloud. Stand up, not for me, for the truth. Dixon looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face shifted. Not the fall of a mask, but the relaxation of one. The deliberate lowering of a guard that had been maintained through effort, not nature. He stood up. It was not effortless. His left side still carried the injury, and there was a careful quality to the movement, a precision born from months of managing exactly this. But he stood, straight, steady, and the room changed when he did, the way rooms change when the actual weight in them is revealed. Rosie said it clearly. Marion Del Rio, Alpha King. Outside the door, Rosie heard Joaquin Smith stop walking. Marion looked at her. His voice, when he spoke, was the same as it had always been. Low, considered, unhurried. But it carried something different now, not performance. Like just the sound of a man speaking as himself. Yes, Rosie breathed. She had known, but knowing and hearing the confirmations spoken aloud were two different physical experiences. She sat down. Start from the beginning, she said, and leave nothing out. He sat too, and he told her. 6 months before this ceremony, Marion Del Rio had gone missing. That was the public story. The Alpha King had vanished, his throne contested, his absence creating a vacuum that certain wolves within his own leadership circle had moved quickly to fill. What the public did not know was that Marion had not been taken. He had chosen to disappear. He had learned, through a trusted source, that 3 members of his inner council had been feeding information to an outside coalition. Wolves from 3 separate packs who wanted the throne destabilized so that a new, more compliant Alpha King could be installed. The plan was not a frontline attack. It was a slow erosion, financial, political, reputational. The kind of betrayal that does not announce itself until you are already too weakened to respond. Marion's response was to vanish. The wheelchair and the Dixon identity were Lynn Carter's design. She had argued that the best intelligence Marion could gather on his own council's loyalty was to observe how they behaved when they believed power was gone. The injury was real. He had sustained it in the incident that had tipped him off to the betrayal. But it was manageable, and it became the foundation of the disguise. He had been watching for 6 months, cataloging, confirming, and then Marie Brown had filed a mating decree pairing her stepdaughter with the pack's crippled Omega. She had no idea, Rosie said slowly. She thought she was disposing of me. She tried to place you beside nothing, Marion said, and she placed you here. Rosie looked at her hands, then at him. I have one question, she said. Was any of this? The recognition at the ceremony? What you said to me that night, bringing me here instead of somewhere I could be managed and kept quiet. Was any of that calculated? Marion did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was direct and honest in the way of a man who has stopped having the energy for comfortable lies. The decision to bring you here was mine. The rest of it, what I've seen of you this week, that was not something I planned for. You are not what I expected, Rosie Brown, and I do not say that to flatter you. I say it because it is true, and because I think you deserve accurate information. Rosie sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "All right, there are things I need, and I am not going to wait to ask for them. Can we talk terms?" Marion Del Rio looked at her with something in his expression that she would only understand fully later. Something between surprise and relief, and a particular quality of attention that a person wears when they meet someone who will match them. "Yes," he said, "we can talk terms." 3 days later, they held a meeting in the Alpha Compound's formal council chamber. Rosie had asked for it. Not Marion, not Lynn. Their Rosie had gone to Joaquin Smith the morning after the East Room conversation and said, "I want a formal meeting. Evelyn Rourke, Joaquin Smith, and Lynn Carter. I have a declaration to make and conditions to set, and I want witnesses of standing." Joaquin had looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he had said, "I'll arrange it." The council chamber was a room with a long table and carved wolf crests running the length of the walls and high windows that let in cold northern light. It smelled of old wax and stone. It was a room built for decisions. Evelyn Rourke arrived in her formal lawkeeper's role. Gray robe, the elder's seal. A ledger she set on the table in front of her and opened without ceremony. She had looked at Rosie when she walked in with an expression that said she had been expecting this moment and had been quietly glad it arrived. Joaquin Smith stood to the right of the table, arms at his sides, exactly as prepared as he always was. Lynn Carter sat at the far end of the table and folded her hands and said nothing. Marion sat to Rosie's left. He had come without the wheelchair. He walked with a slight favoring of his left side, a cane in his right hand, but he walked. The room noted it without comment. Rosie stood. She laid out what she knew, clearly, in order. The sigil, the communication chain, the security protocol that was not domestic but military grade. Adam Cropper's slip with the word "Sir." The training yard, the mourning forms, the Alpha King's household mark above the document room door, the 7 days of observation and what they had confirmed. Then she said, "Marion Del Rio is the Alpha King. His disappearance was a covert strategy to expose betrayal within his own council. The forced mating my stepmother arranged was designed to destroy my future within the pack. Instead, it placed me, without either her knowledge or mine, at the center of a royal investigation. I am the Alpha King's bound mate under traditional law. That is a fact we are all going to deal with, and I would like to do so directly." Nobody spoke. Then Evelyn Rourke wrote something in the ledger. Rosie continued, "I am not here to be managed or placed or given a ceremonial role that requires me to sit quietly and look appropriate. I am setting conditions, and I want them documented." She had written them out the night before. She read them from the paper, not because she needed to, but because she wanted them formal, heard, exact. First, full access to PAC law and governance education, equivalent to what a senior council member receives. Second, written protections for Omega rank PAC members to be drafted and ratified within 90 days of Marion's public return to the throne. Protections that limited the use of binding decrees, required independent elder review of all forced arrangements, and established a formal process for contesting coerced agreements. Third, Marie Brown's official standing in the Brown Pack to be investigated, her manipulation of Rowan Brown's authorization to be documented and entered into the lawkeeper's record, and her influence removed. Fourth, Rowan Brown to face formal pack accountability for his silence and authorization. Not destruction, not banishment, but consequence, named and applied, and a required period of documented restitution. Fifth, Rosie's own rank as the Alpha King's bound mate to be treated as earned through her own standing and not inherited from the title. She wanted a role defined by contribution, not ceremony. She looked up from the paper. Those are my conditions. I would like to know if any of them are going to be contested. Lynn Carter, at the end of the table, made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was warmer than anything she had said in their previous conversation. Marion looked at Rosie with the same expression. From the East Room, measured, steady, honest. He said, "None of them are going to be contested. All of them are going to be done." Evelyn Rourke wrote for a long time. Marion Del Rio's public return to the throne happened on a Tuesday, 42 days after the moonbinding ceremony. It was not theatrical. He had spent those 42 days doing the final work of the covert investigation, gathering sealed testimony from 3 compound staff members who had served as witnesses to internal communications, meeting with 2 pack elders who had suspected the council betrayal for months but lacked confirmation, and building the evidentiary chain that would make the accountability process impossible to challenge in formal law. Rosie had worked beside him through most of it. She had not asked for permission to participate. She had simply showed up in the document room the morning after the council chamber meeting and begun organizing the evidence log. When Adam Cropper had looked at Marion uncertainly, Marion had said, simply, "She stays." And that had been the end of the question. She learned in those weeks that Marion Del Rio was a more careful man than his legend suggested. The stories about the Alpha King were large: dominance, force, a presence that bent other wolves' instincts sideways when he entered a room. The reality was quieter. He was methodical. He read everything twice. He asked questions when he did not know things instead of pretending certainty. He was hard on himself in the specific way of people who have high standards and have learned that other people will suffer for it if those standards are not also accompanied by self-correction. He was also, she discovered, unexpectedly good at silence. Not avoidance, not the passive silence of her father, which was made of discomfort and the avoidance of difficulty. Marion's silence was active, the silence of someone genuinely listening, me taking in what was being said and thinking about it before responding. She had not known before this that silence could be a form of respect. There were evenings in the library room when the work was done and neither of them left immediately, and they talked, not about the investigation, but about other things. The pack governance structures Marion had been studying since he was 12 years old. The wolf ecology texts Rosie had read in her mother's library. The question of whether ceremony law needed to be reformed entirely or rebuilt from scratch, and what the difference was between reform and replacement. These conversations built something. Slowly, the way honest things are built. Marion's return to the throne was made at the full moon assembly, the same full moon forum that the pack used for its major announcements. He arrived without the wheelchair, without the disguise. He walked to the elders' platform with the cane and his slight favoring of the left side, and the particular quality of physical presence that Lynn Carter had once described, when Rosie asked her about it, as the thing you cannot teach a person. They either carry themselves that way or they don't. He carried himself that way. The 3 council members who had betrayed him were present at that assembly. They had not been warned. Marion had calculated that warning them would give them the opportunity to prepare a defense, and the investigation had not been conducted to be debated. It had been conducted to be irrefutable. The testimonies were read, the communications were presented. The financial arrangements with the outside coalition were documented and shown. Each of the 3 men had a moment where the room could see the exact point at which they understood they had been observed the entire time. It was not a pleasant thing to watch. Rosie watched it anyway. All 3 were stripped of their council positions and removed from PAC territory within 30 days. 2 weeks after Marion's return, the formal assembly for PAC accountability was held. This was Rosie's part. She stood beside Marion on the elders' platform, and she read the documented findings of Marie Brown's manipulation, the isolation of Rosie Brown over 26 months, the managed authorization of the binding decree, the falsified scheduling conflicts that removed Rosie from PAC functions, the deliberate distancing campaign conducted through the social network of the Brown family's contacts. Marie had dressed carefully for the assembly. She arrived in dark clothing with the particular confidence of someone who had never, in her estimation, miscalculated. She had miscalculated. Evelyn Rourke's lawkeeper record was read aloud. Every item, every date, every witnessed incident. The crowd, larger than at the moon ceremony, because the Alpha King's return had drawn every PAC member to the assembly, was very quiet as the list went on. When it was finished, Evelyn looked up. Under documented abuse of ceremonial decree law, the manipulation of a PAC member's right to informed consent, and the fraudulent management of family patriarch authorization, Marie Brown is found in formal violation of 3 provisions of the traditional law code. Sentence: removal of standing within the Brown PAC. Banishment from PAC territory within 7 days. All social and governance affiliations held through the Brown family connection to be terminated effective immediately. Marie stood very still through the reading. When it was over, she did not look at Rosie. She looked at the ground. And then she turned and walked out of the assembly, and the crowd parted for her, the way crowds part for someone they no longer have any use for. Not violently, not dramatically, just with a particular quiet indifference. That is, in its own way, the complete withdrawal of everything she had ever wanted. She was gone from PAC territory within 3 days. No one sent word. No one checked. Rowan Brown's accountability process was different. He had not designed the harm. He had enabled it through passivity. It's through the abdication of a father's responsibility to see what was happening in his own house and choose difficulty over comfort. The formal process assigned him a 6-month period of PAC community restitution work, physical, present, unglamorous work in the lower PAC district. The kind of work that puts you among people you have been too comfortable to notice. He was also required to complete a formal documented apology to Rosie, witnessed by Evelyn Rourke, entered into the lawkeeper's record. He did both. He did them without complaint, which was, for Rowan Brown, a form of growth Rosie had not been sure she would see. She did not forgive him immediately. Forgiveness was not a switch. But she watched him work, and she watched him show up, and she watched him slowly begin to choose presence over avoidance, and she left the door open. And that was as much as she could give for now. She thought it was honest. The Omega protections were drafted within the 90-day window Rosie had named. She wrote the first draft herself, with Evelyn Rourke reviewing the law language and Marion reviewing the enforcement provisions. They argued over 3 sections, productively, with evidence and specificity, and the final document was stronger for it. It was ratified at the Winter Assembly and entered into formal PAC law. It limited the binding decree process to situations of mutual documented consent, required independent elder review before any ceremonial bond could be sealed, and established a formal petition process for the review of arrangements entered under coercion. It was the first new Omega protection added to the traditional code in 40 years. Then Rosie sat at the elders' platform the night it was ratified and thought of Leah Taylor and Carolyn, who had both come forward during the accountability process to provide corroborating testimony about Marie's isolation campaign. She thought of every young woman in the pack who would now have a legal structure to stand on rather than only her own will. It was not everything. It was a real beginning. She and Marion were formally joined at the winter solstice ceremony. Not the forced, witnessed humiliation of the moon ceremony, but a quiet, chosen thing, held in the compound's stone courtyard with the people who had been part of the truth of it. Lynn Carter, Evelyn Rourke, Joaquin Smith, Leah Taylor, Carolyn, Dennis Howell, Adam Cropper. Rosie wore her mother's silver earrings. She had found them in the bottom of Clara's jewelry box after coming back to the Brown house to collect her things. Marion, for the first time since she had known him, looked something close to nervous. She found that deeply reassuring. They built something in the years that followed, not quickly, not without difficulty. There were disputes about governance strategy and late nights, when the work of rebuilding a corrupted system felt genuinely impossible, and mornings when they were sharp with each other and had to sit down and speak plainly until the sharpness became communication. But it was real, and it held. Rosie completed her formal PAC law education in 14 months. She moved directly into the governance track. Not a ceremonial role, not a title that existed for appearances. She chaired the new Omega Protection Oversight Committee. She worked with Evelyn Rourke on 2 additional law reforms in the following year. In the second year of their formal bond, their first child was born, a daughter. They named her Clara, after Rosie's mother, who had known the names of every plant in the woods and had believed, with the particular faith of women who pay attention to the world, that things grown in good conditions tend toward life. In the third year, a son. They named him Rowan, not without difficulty, not without conversation, but with the specific kind of deliberate grace that comes from choosing to honor the potential of a person rather than the worst of what they did. Rowan Brown held his grandson for the first time on a cold winter morning and did not say anything for a long while. When he finally did, as his voice was rough and quiet, "I'm going to try to deserve this," he said. Rosie looked at him. "I know," she said. "That's why we used your name." The pack changed in those 3 years, not completely, not overnight, but in the way that things change when the systems that allow cruelty are replaced with ones that do not. The ceremony still happened under full moons. The torches still burned in their iron brackets. But the old stone courtyard, the one where they had tried to bury Rosie Brown, became the place where the Omega Protection Law was read aloud every year at the Winter Assembly. A reminder, carved into the annual calendar of the pack, that dignity is not given by rank. It is held, or it is taken. And the people who try to take it do not always understand who they are handing it to. If Rosie's story lit something in you, that quiet moment where she refused to break, where she chose evidence over panic, where she set her terms and held them, please don't just scroll away. Hit subscribe, tap like, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one of them, and it helps this channel reach the next person who needs a story exactly like this one. Thank you. Truly. Now, Let's close this out properly. Some stories aren't about revenge. They're about correction. About the moment someone tries to erase you and accidentally places you exactly where you can rebuild everything they were counting on staying broken. Rosie Brown walked into a moon courtyard in a white dress with a bouquet of pale flowers and stayed upright while a crowd watched and a stepmother smiled and a father looked away. She did not win that night by fighting. She won it by refusing to collapse. And she spent the months that followed doing the quiet, unglamorous work of watching and recording and thinking and building a case before she knew exactly what she was building it for. Marion Del Rio, the alpha king the world believed was gone, learned what power actually is, not the title, not the throne, not the room that adjusts when you walk in. It is what you protect when no one is watching. It is the moment you choose to tell a young woman the full truth when it would have been easier to manage her. It is the patience to rebuild a system instead of simply retaking control of a broken one. Together, they built something that outlasted the cruelty that created it. A law that protects people who had none. 2 children who will grow up in a pack that practices accountability. A marriage that was made of honesty before it was made of anything else. Anne Marie Brown, who planned all of it, who built the trap and sealed the decree and smiled at that ceremony like she had already won, ended up exactly where people who mistake cruelty for cleverness tend to end up. Forgotten, not with fire, not with ceremony, just the quiet and complete withdrawal of everyone she had ever tried to control. That is its own kind of justice. Thank you for sitting with this story. Thank you for giving it your time, your heart, your full attention. This kind of story only reaches the people who need it, because people like you choose to stay until the end. We'll be back soon with another tale of hidden identity, pack politics, and the quiet kind of strength that changes everything. The kind of strength that doesn't shout, the kind that builds. Until then, keep your eyes open, trust patterns over promises. And remember, the person everyone underestimates is often the one who rewrites the rules. See you next time.